recording has also started. It's 11, so I think we can start, and slowly people will join in. Anyways, as I said, the webinar is going to be recorded and available on the project website. I will provide you a brief introduction to the project and to the webinar agenda, and then we will start with the thematic presentations. I would justly ask you to confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Thank you so much. So the webinar today is going to be about barriers to sustainable agriculture uptake that we have studied through some of the Enfasys case studies. Enfasys has 10 in-depth case studies, and today we will present the initial results of 4 case studies. As you can see from the agenda, Clementine from USC Louvain will present the work performed to identify the barriers from a methodological perspective under the work package 2. And then we will start with the results from the 4 case studies that we'll present you today. First one will be presented by Peter Fint, the German Enfasys case study that it's about sustainable transformation of conventional pig farming and pig value chain. Then we will move to the case study led by UC Louvain, which is the French-Belgian Enfasys case study about agro-environment climate measures implementations at territorial level context. Then we have the Irish Enfasys case study that is led by Chegas, which is about to grow the organic dairy farming sector in Ireland. Finally, we will move to the Flemish Enfasys case studies led by Ivo and presented to you by Luis. That it's about the sustainable growth of organic vegetable production in open air. And then we have time for some conclusions. For this webinar, you will have time to ask for questions at the end of each presentation. You can type in the questions as well during the presentations of the Enfasys partners. Just a few details about the project. The topic of the project is Horizon CS6 2021 Farm to Fork 0108. The project starting date is the 1st of September 2022. It's a 48 months project. It's a research and innovation project, so strongly focused on research. It's coordinated by Ivi Ilvo from Belgium, and the budget is 4.5 million euros. These are the partners of the project. So there are 11 partners from 12 partners from many European countries. And that's a very short introduction, and I wish you to enjoy this webinar, and I give the floor to Clementine.
Thank you. So, can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. So I'm just going to give a brief presentation with first a reminder of how the data collection took place in the case studies. Then I want to give a bit of a conceptual perspective on what we call barriers. And I will also give a few elements about the aggregated data. So when we look at the 10 case studies, what do we see in terms of the barriers? So this is just a short introduction that aims at giving you a good base for the case study presentations afterwards. So if there are some people in the room who are not from Enfasys, this is just a reminder of the 10 case studies we are speaking about. So they are located in different countries, and they also look at really diverse topics. So case study 1 is about the uptake of agro-environmental and climate measures in France and Belgium. The second case study is located in Serbia and focuses on regenerative agriculture. Case study 3 is in Switzerland and also focuses similarly to case study 1 on policies that support biodiversity practices. Case study 4 is about protein autonomy in cattle farms in France. Case study 5 is located in Germany and looks at a pig meat production as more as a sectorial point of view. Case study 6 is located in Greece, and looks at branding and marketing strategies around sustainable practices. Case study 7 is in Slovenia and is focused on direct selling. So short food systems. Italy, the case study in Italy, case study 8, is around a community of people who have organized around a cooperative and produce local and direct the production towards local consumption. Case study 9 in Ireland is about the dairy farming sector, especially with organic production. And finally, case study 10 is in Belgium on the Flanders region. And this one is about organic certified vegetable production. So as you can see, we are looking at quite a big diversity of sectors, of practices, of locations, etc. So with regard to the data collection, it took place in different steps. And it was first based on literature review, documentation that is already available. And then there were some direct interviews of experts and of actors. And finally, there were some focus groups. In some cases, the actors who were already interviewed were brought to the focus groups. And in some other case, like more actors were also involved at that moment. So the barriers that we are going to more specifically talk about today, they come from these 3 sources. And it was done as an iterative process. That first, if there was information already available, that was the first base of the work. And then more inputs were brought through the interviews. And finally, the focus group was the opportunity to collectively discuss the barriers and possibly identify if there are divergent opinions, and if anything was missing, it was then added. So after that stage, like, we consider that we have a comprehensive and reliable overview of the barriers in each of the case studies. So when we are talking about barriers, what are we actually focusing on? So what we call barriers, it's concrete aspects that hinder the development or the uptake of an innovation, and it can take place at any location within the system. So it's quite I think it's quite simple definition that we can all understand, and it's important to differentiate this from what we call a lock-in. So a lock-in is when the system as a whole evolves only within a limited range of options that don't imply a significant change or a reconfiguration. And a lock-in happens when there are many barriers and the barriers are intertwined. And all together, the barriers make it a very big effort for actors to change something in their operations or to adopt an innovation. So there are always barriers, but there's not always a lock-in. I think that's the main thing I want to pinpoint here. Yeah, so this is just a little illustration from my team that helps to understand this. So you can see on the left that there are many small barriers in the system, and all together, when they are intertwined, entangled, becomes a lock-in. And from there, we can look at levers, we can look at operational measures that hopefully go through the barriers and allow to get to a new situation. Okay, so more concretely, what did we see in the case studies? So when we aggregate the work that was done by the 10 case study coordinators, more than 100 experts and actors were interviewed, and about 12 focus groups took place. So that's a pretty significant data collection, I think, and collectively 400, like more than 400 barriers were identified in the case studies. To analyze these barriers, we asked the case study coordinators to characterize the barriers according to two variables. So first, which type of barrier is that? Is it technical, market-related, etc.? I'm going to explain it more in detail. That's the first variable. And the second one is, where is the barrier located in the system? So when we look at the types of barriers, we provided a framework that also comes from my team, from Citra. And there are 6 categories that we proposed: technical barriers, financial barriers, market-related barriers, organizational barriers, cultural barriers, and knowledge-related barriers. This framework comes from the literature and also from previous European projects where there was similar work done, and somehow these categories, we always fall back into them. Yeah, we kept another category, the other barriers, in case there would be any other information that wouldn't already fit in the framework. So when we do that, we get, like, through the 10 case studies, this is the repartition of the barriers according to the categories. So you can see that it's pretty well spread, with around 15% for each category. And that's the second classification. So this is the location of barriers. Are they operating within the farms, between the farms and the processors, at the distribution stage, at the consumer stage, or regarding stakeholders that are outside the value chain? And here, that's the aggregated data that we have. So most of the barriers identified are at the farm stage, and that's kind of, it makes sense because the focus of this project is farming practices. But we also have, like, barriers at each other stages of the value chains, and as well outside of the value chains. That's what I wanted to show you, and I'm going to give the floor to the case studies coordinators themselves.
Thank you, Clementine, very much. It was a brief overview of the methodology, but I think we touch upon several important aspects. such as difference between barriers and lock-ins. Okay, now it's indeed time to give the floor to the case studies coordinators. We will start from the German case study with the Professor Peter Finn presenting the German case study. Peter, the floor is yours. I can see your screen.
Yeah, thank you very
and
much.
I can hear you.
So, good morning, interest. The case study I want to present this morning is about this intended sustainability transformation of a conventional pork value chain in Germany. So our case is located in the Berlin-Brandenburg metropolitan area, which has about 6 million inhabitants and covers an area of 30,000 square kilometers. And the background to our case is that the Brandenburg Farmers Association had developed a consensual proposal, the so-called Brandenburg Way, where they proposed to increase regional food self-sufficiency and to meet higher sustainability standards, but with the expectation that then producers are also willing to pay higher prices for the more sustainable and more animal welfare friendly products, and that there will also be more public remuneration available. The case study is interesting because the pig sector is probably this sector currently most in crisis in Germany. To produce pigs, you've got very high investment costs, while the returns are currently very low. It's also sufficiently focused to be manageable to examine the sector along the entire value chain. We have some very promising best practice farms and some regional labeling initiatives, which might be first steps towards the sustainability transition that we have in mind. But it's a very challenging situation, both upstream and downstream. For example, import-based compound fodder or the disappearance of regional processing capacities. And the pig sector is not analyzed in any other of the case studies in Enfasys. So our research interest is to better understand the place of pig farming in sustainable agriculture and food systems, and to see what lessons might be learned for pig farming in Brandenburg, but also for Germany and across Europe. So the focus of the case study is an intended transformation at the level of pre-farming input and farm levels. This means to build animal husbandry which are based on improved or even exemplary animal welfare criteria, so-called animal welfare stables. We want to increase regional feed production and reorient the very specialized production systems towards more combined or integrated and diverse production systems, which can occur either at the level of single farms or through farm cooperation. And at the other levels of the value chain, we want to develop a regional pork value chain with a quality label, thereby create more willingness to pay at the level of policy and consumers. We want to foster more closed material cycles beyond the production system level, for example, links to biomass for energy and raw materials. And the overall aim is to create a regional pig farming system that is part of a more sustainable regional food system circuit. This is the actor value network map. You see it's quite complicated and it would take up the next hour to explain all of this. Just in the upper left corner, these are the pig farmers. Then around them are other parts of the farming sector. The yellow area is the market and labeling initiatives and similar. Then we've got that orange arc at the bottom. That's the value chain. And we've got the area of governance on the top right hand. Below those are the consumers and citizens. And in the bottom right corner is the research area. Now we then try to identify barriers, and overall there were lots of technical barriers, financial barriers, organizational barriers, knowledge-related barriers, market-related barriers, and cultural barriers, and also some other barriers. Altogether, we found more than 40 different barriers. So in our participatory workshop series, we had first a discussion about what are the most important, most relevant of these barriers. In the first step, these could be grouped into three main categories. The first group are kind of more legal and administrative barriers, in particular the constantly changing legal requirements and specifications for animal husbandry, then complaints about incompatible legal rules for higher animal protection on the one hand and lower emissions on the other hand, the slow adaptation of regulations which are related to the approval and authorization of new stable infrastructure, and uncertain public funding. The second group are consumers' lack of willingness to pay for higher quality products and decreasing demand for pork constantly over the last 10 years. And the third group is the problem that slaughterhouses are a bottleneck for this sector, and particularly in the Berlin-Brandenburg region, there is a lack of regional slaughtering capacities, which makes it very difficult to create regional or local value chains. There's also a scarcity of skilled labor and fierce international competition for price. And a final barrier is the very long-term nature of conversion processes in general. In the second step, then, we condensed these challenges and ranked them, and these were the top 5 barriers. The top barrier from the perspective of the participants were the constantly changing requirements for husbandry specification, followed by the lack of willingness to pay more for higher quality products, international competition, the lack of compatibility between animal protection and emissions protection standards, and finally, the long-term nature of the conversion processes. So we then looked for ways to address the different barriers. To do that, we first located them. So the first barrier, the constantly changing requirements, that's located at the governance level, top hand right, where we have the red arrow. The underlying mechanisms are political forces and tendencies, societal demand, and new scientific findings. And potential levers to address this barrier would be a steady long-term legislation that defines stable requirements in terms of animal welfare, steady long-term legislation that defines general animal welfare requirements in pig production, for example, regarding tail docking, castration, and other practices, or the ruling out of such practices. And finally, reliable long-term funding for adaptable, stable models. The lack of willingness to pay, that's located with the consumers. Again, the red arrow on the right-hand side. The two main mechanisms here is a tradition of cheap pork meat availability and consumption, supply of low-end pork quality. And potential levers here would be public education or awareness-raising campaigns to increase consumer knowledge about higher production costs for farmers when they adopt higher animal welfare and higher ecological standards, but also knowledge generally about animal welfare and ecological issues in farming. A second lever would be tax policies that would support more sustainably produced pork meat products, and finally, marketing strategies also for a regional quality label. The international competition, that's located in the governance sector because of international trade agreements in the farming sector and in retail. So we have 3 different red arrows, and the mechanisms are global differences between production systems, which means large differences in production costs, the type of market regulation, more regulation of domestic producers, and lobbying forces to keep these differences in place. And potential levers to address these barriers would be a unified mandatory labeling on packaging about the production conditions, including ecological and social aspects. The fourth barrier is the lack of compatibility between animal protection and emission protection regulations. That's located at the governance level. The mechanisms, again, are political forces and trends, societal demand, and new scientific findings. And potential levers here would be an attempt to achieve more policy coherence across topics and across governance levels, to fund research that combines animal welfare and emissions protection, and finally, long-term legislation that would define stable requirements in terms of ecological criteria and animal welfare criteria. And the final barrier is the very long-term nature of the conversion processes, which is symbolized by the cycle here on the top right-hand side. So because it's long-term, many farmers hesitate to adopt actions with conversion enabling potential. That hesitation then increases the duration of the conversion process, which then reinforces the same cycle. This is a barrier less within the system, but more a barrier by definition. And the reinforcing mechanisms are hesitant behaviors along the value chain in processing, retail, and farming. Potential levers would be a political framework that creates long-term guarantees or hedges for economic actors who invest in business strategies like regional quality labels, as well as for farmers who invest in sustainable, stable systems and regional fodder production. That also requires a political willingness to create livestock-friendly regulations. And a third lever would be to create the prerequisites for approval of new stable buildings. There are lots of problems with the administrative process, and that would be necessary to improve the conditions for faster and unified legal permission. So to conclude, in our case study, in the Berlin-Brandenburg region, we have found barriers at various levels in the system. And there is a trend that the most hindering barriers are in governance and the lacking consumers' willingness to pay and in the market structure. And the levers are at various levels in the system, but it's very clear that the governance level is absolutely indispensable to make the other levers more effective and viable. So we are now looking forward for the next work packages, which are behavior, farmer behavior, and business strategy development. And we are curious to see whether we can identify further barriers or whether these barriers then carry different weights, or whether we can also find other levers for transformational change. That's it from my side. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Peter. I don't see any questions right now in the chat, but if somebody would like to ask a question, you can also raise your hand. If no questions are asked, then we can move to the next case study, that it's the French-Belgian case study. Antoine, the floor is yours. I can see your presentation.
Thank you, Davide.
And I can hear you well.
Okay. So hi, everyone. I will try to address the same research topics as Peter, but for the case study we are following with UC Louvain, which is biodiversity objectives and agri-environmental schemes implementation in the Hauts-de-France region. I hope you can also see my pointer because it will be useful later. So when focusing on the Hauts-de-France region, we have first to highlight the main objectives of we are targeting, which is the biodiversity objectives. There has been some key targets set at EU level and a set of ambitious goals. And as you may know, the main policy framework we are which is useful for that is the Common Agricultural Policy, and this is the main policy framework we are addressing. More specifically, the second pillar, which is centered around the European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development and its related rural development plans, which are regionally defined. And so there are some multiple objectives, and we focus on EACMs, which are part of these rural development programs. And as you can see, for France, which is the first user of CAP subsidies, if you look just quickly at the pie chart on the right of the slide, you can see that the French CAP budget follows a very conventional repartition of subsidies, with a large part being dedicated to the first pillar. And so French agriculture can only benefit from a restrained amount of resources for rural development. And it is in this case that in this framework, the ECMs are developed with only 2% of the budget. There are also some additional territorial initiatives outside the CAP that we are trying to focus on in this case study, such as the support for hedges and also for instance, premiums offered by the value chains to producers for good environmental practices. And so, as I mentioned, for the Hauts-de-France, there is some specific rural development plans that are interesting. Two of them amongst the 22 designed in France. And what we try to focus on is the meso level entry point. Why? Because we wanted to target specifically neither policy goals on the top and neither operational constraints on the farm level, but more what's in between, which is the actors active in the policy implementations process around ECM. And so this is our value network map. It's a bit dense, as you can see, but I propose just to give you a quick overview of the main actors involved around common agricultural policies and ECM policy and the main point of interactions. So starting from the top left of the chart, you can see that there is some political objectives that are influenced by advocacy groups such as NGOs, unions, and other pressure groups. These objectives, once defined, they can be translated into strategies. So first at the EU level amongst the three main institutions, but also at national level for France, between two key ministries, which are the Environment and Agriculture ministries. So yeah, and in our case, for France, the Agriculture Ministry is responsible for the common agricultural policy. So it's the one we are mostly focusing on. Yeah, and so this strategy, they can be translated into policy outputs, mainly for the CAP, the National Strategic Plan that has been designed for France and which englobes the list of agri-environmental and climate measures, but also some other action plans and regional programs. And we're focusing more on the CAP framework. Yeah, and ECM are grouped into concrete plans that we call EEC plans, which are coordinated by voluntary local organisms such as the agricultural chambers, which are skilled for that, also cooperatives, and for which farmers can participate here, and this they can operate these agro-environmental and climate measures such as farming practices. So we are talking about objectives, then implementation in form of policies, and then finally in the form of practices. And then we have also some parallel dynamics that we don't have much time to go into detail into, but such as market dynamics and also research actors that are really involved and important for feedback on the design of these policies. And also to mention the role of regional administration, council, and agencies that are mandated by the Agricultural Ministry for the CAP, and that are also contributing to the strategy, but at regional level, and also important for the territorial policy making. Okay, and so during the interviews, we managed to categorize better how these actors interact with each other using the flow or the flux concept. And we wanted to present you three main types of fluxes that we identified. First, the power dynamics flows, which is mainly around the institutional mandates appointed by superior organism to lower organisms, such as, for instance, ministries here that are mandating regional administrations. Then we have also some financial flows. This is quite straightforward. There's also some flow of money between actors and institutions. And finally, there's also some flow of knowledge circulating between the actors, such as advising flow, but also more generally exchange of information between actors. Based on that, we decided to show you only today a few barriers identified through the interviews and focus groups with actors. We have been able to allocate them again between the different categories. Here's a first set of barriers around power dynamics. For instance, in yellow, you can see the fact that regional actors are often limited in flexibility by the framework that is imposed at national level. And we also wanted to show you really quickly the relative location of these barriers on the VNM, which is again a bit dense, but it's easier when we focus on one specific barrier. Some barriers are really systemic and can be plugged on the flow, but others are more specific to specific relationships between actors, such as the one we just mentioned about the strictness of national strategies and the subsidiarity of regional strategies. It can be located really specifically over here on the top part. And then you have all the other barriers in the category power dynamics that we have been also able to map. We also have some financial barriers, and it's quite easy to understand, but it's also important, the fact that there is a lack of financial resource to design and implement farming practices and measures that are both economically and environmentally sustainable and efficient. And this can be located here between the transition between the strategies and the policy outputs. This is where the budgets are set. Again, the other barriers related to finance. And if we move to the knowledge category, one of the main barriers was the fact that there's a lack of skills related to agri-environmental practices to best advise farmers trying to participate in these programs. And this can be located just in the stage of advising, supporting territorial implementation of ECM by farmers over here. And finally, if you address the technical barriers, we can cite the fact that there's a lot of complexity and administrative burden around ECM. And for instance, for the subsidies, it's quite complicated. And again, this is located between the responsible for administration and implementation of territorial policy, such as EC plans. And so if we try to map all the barriers we had identified together, we managed to do this, but it's quite dense again, so there's a lot more going on. It's a quick overview. And there is also some opportunities that have been identified, some key levels, such as the unification of administrative and budgetary management, tax breaks as incentive to include ECM in farm management, harmonization of data gathering while defining process for farm level diagnostics, crop insurance, and so on. But it's a work in progress. We're continuing this to work package 6, where we're trying to co-design policy interventions with actors, and starting back from the barriers I just presented, we try to gather some ideas. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. I'll let the floor to the next presentation.
Thank you so much, Anton. Yes, if there are no questions, then the next presenter will be Niall from Chagas. Niall, the floor is yours. We can see your presentation.
Perfect, thank you. My name's Niall Hammond. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Chagas. So today I'm here to talk about growing the organic dairy sector in Ireland. So under the Farm to Fork strategy, the European Commission has set a target of 25% of agricultural land to be farmed under organic farming principles by 2030. Within Ireland's CAP strategic plan, the objective is 7.5% by 2027 and 10% by 2030 under the Climate Action Plan. So while this Ireland's targets fall below the EU goal, it's ambitious, as when it was proposed, only 2% of agricultural land was currently under organic production. Nevertheless, Ireland is striving to increase its proportion of organic land. Furthermore, a transition to organic farming will help to progress targets for reduced pesticide and chemical fertilizer use, and will help with targets around climate resilience. So in this case study, we chose to focus on the organic dairy sector rather than the broader full organic sector in Ireland, as conventional dairy farming is one of the most profitable farming systems in Ireland. And while it's profitable for conventional farmers, within the organic dairy sector, sorry, we found that it was lagging behind. So conventional dairy accounts for 11% of the total number of farms, with over 15,000 farms, whereas in 2019, there are only 62 organic dairy farms. Last year, this increased to about 70 organic dairy farms, with another 12 in conversion. So we were interested in understanding why dairy farmers in particular are not converting in the same numbers as other sectors. So we began by conducting interviews and focus groups with various stakeholders to identify barriers and to create this value network map. I know it's the text is a little bit small, so it's difficult to see, but basically in the transformational potential of the system generally comes from the Irish government. Most of the interventions so far that have helped have come from here. So I was looking at, it's the value network map. So yeah, basically, like we've created our value network map, and basically what we found is a lot of the transformational potential comes through the Irish government. There's a reliance on the Irish government to implement interventions for change. So we identified many different barriers, but today I just wanted to focus on these 4. So first, I want to discuss 2 areas where barriers have been identified and are currently being addressed. These include the fact that the Irish government's organic payments were only partially compensating organic farmers, and that the Irish organic market is relatively small. Then I want to discuss 2 areas where more work is needed. These include a lack of critical infrastructure and an underutilized advisory sector in promoting organics. So a key barrier was the need to address the fact that the organic payments often didn't fully compensate organic dairy farmers. So the organic farming scheme is Ireland's primary measure for incentivizing farmers to convert to organic farming in Ireland. A criticism in the past was that the rates did not fully compensate for the cost of converting, particularly in the dairy sector. In organics, there's a restriction on stocking rates. So for many dairy farmers, they would have to reduce their herd size, and this would in turn reduce their income. So this made conversion an unpopular option. So in 2023, the organic farming scheme payments were reviewed, which resulted in an average increase of 54% for livestock farmers. So per hectare payments for dairy farmers moved from €220 to 350 for when they're in conversion, and from €170 to €300 for full organic status. So this has seen an additional 1,050 farmers joining the scheme in 2024, and a tripling of area being farmed organically since 2020. I don't have the specific breakdown though on how many of these new entrants are dairy farmers. So it'll be interesting to see if the increased payments have helped to incentivize them to convert. Then the next barrier was that there's a criticism that Irish consumers don't value quality food, that they would choose cheap food products over more expensive products, and therefore were unwilling to buy organic products in any great detail, quantities, sorry. So the Irish government has set about tackling this through Board BIA. So Board BIA is a public body which is tasked with promoting Irish foods and drinks, both domestically and internationally. So Board BIA has started a domestic marketing campaign in 2023 to grow the organic market in Ireland. They also recently actually hired their first full-time organic manager. So while it's a bit too early to understand what the impact this campaign will have on Irish consumers, one benefit we've seen is that actually for farmers, they have a greater awareness now that there's a growing market in Ireland. Previously, many conventional farmers were hesitant to convert to organics as they feared that it wasn't a large enough market to sell their milk to. And then a lack of critical infrastructure has been identified as a major barrier to growth. So the barrier really impacts organic dairy farmers and organic processors. So basically, the geographic spread of processors and farmers leads to additional transport costs. And in some areas of Ireland, it prohibits farmers from converting if no processor is willing to collect milk from their farm. This means that for some conventional farmers, they can't convert unless they can encourage other farmers in their area to also convert them. There's a need for basically a critical mass of farmers to make it feasible for processors to collect in their area. Then another one was around a lack of physical infrastructure, such as dryers. Basically, the conventional Irish dairy sector produces 10% of the global infant formula in the world. But if you were to try to buy organic baby formula in Ireland, it would come from French, not Irish cows. So at the moment, there is not enough organic milk in the country to turn a conventional dryer that makes baby formula on for even an hour or two. So you either need to greatly increase the production of organic milk to make it viable to use the current infrastructure, or you need large investment from processors to build a more sustainable, more suitable organic dryer. The issue is that for many conventional processors, they are making good money with conventional products, and the price premium for organic products is not high enough to attract them to invest in a dryer. So there's also concerns from processors that there isn't enough supply of organic milk to meet current demand. So processors are concerned that there wouldn't be the supply of milk for additional products. So dairy farmers looking to convert need advisors that are knowledgeable about the support schemes available to them and the technical requirements for farming organically. Uncertainty over what to expect from converting is a major barrier to conversion, and good supports from advisors could really alleviate this concern. However, there are concerns that the current advisory system in Ireland does not provide the right support for farmers considering converting. There is a worry that advisors who are not confident in their knowledge of organic farming systems won't bring up the topic of organic farming for fear that they won't be able to answer their clients' questions. So recently, Teagasc has begun hiring organic farming advisors. They've also started providing training to the Agricultural Consultants Association. There's also actually, for the first time in a long time, the first organic research farms have been established in Ireland, but this is only looking at beef and sheep and won't look at dairy. So there's really a greater need for kind of upskilling conventional advisors in organic farming and more research specifically on organic dairy farming. So while starting from an albeit small base, Ireland has tripled its area under organic farming since 2022 from 2% to 5%. So it kind of shows that with the right supports, progress can be made. However, Ireland is currently within organic farming, about 90% of organic farmers are beef or sheep farmers, while only about 2 to 3% are dairy. So there's a real need to understand what supports are needed to have greater adoption within the dairy sector. So that's it from me, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Noel. See in the chat. Okay, it was just a message from Peter before. Then we can move to the last presentation of today, that is about the Belgian case study, or better, the Flemish case study. And the presenter is Luis.
Yes, do you see my presentation?
We see your presentation, and now we hear you as well.
Okay, great. We'll see. I'm working on another computer. Apologies. So I'm Louis Tessier. I'm a researcher working at the UVO Social Science Unit in Belgium. I was involved in conducting the case study in Belgium, implementing the case study research and innovation activities. So the goal of this case study was to identify actors and relations, barriers and opportunities for the sustainable growth of organic vegetable farming in open air in Flanders. And we do that in collaboration with Bioform, which is the sector organization of organic farmers, but also represent value chain actors. A brief overview of what you need to know about Flemish agriculture. So, of course, Flanders is a densely populated and affluent region, northern region of Belgium. It's well connected with other countries, but it's also a good place to farm in terms of like pedoclimatic conditions. Historically, there has developed a high concentration of intensive livestock and vegetable and fruit production. And around it, there is a whole ecosystem of public and private research and innovation organizations and companies supporting this whole process. However, there are some challenges. So there's like elsewhere in Europe, we see an aging and declining farming population. And while Flemish agriculture, is touted as being highly eco-efficient because of the enormous concentration of all of these activities in a small area. It does exceed a number of local environmental and social boundaries. As we, for example, think about nitrogen pollution, like water pollution, and so on. And this also leads to political conflicts over this limited environmental action space. And in that context, organic agriculture is often touted as a solution, perhaps, to reduce these environmental pressures. However, as we can see in this slide, like Belgium on average is doing quite well in terms of organic, in terms of agricultural area under organic certification, albeit far from the 25% that is the ambition is according to the Farm to Fork strategy by 2030. But Flanders has a very low organic farmland share. Now, in order, of course, like this problematic has actually been well studied. So there's quite some literature and there's quite some expertise there, which I dove in for this project. But I also talked with stakeholders across the value chain, both farmers, input suppliers, processors, and retailers, as well as various sector representatives and employees in government institutions. Out of this, I've created a couple of value network maps, and in order to keep it to have an overview, I've decided to create different maps. The first maps represent this first map represents the physical streams of organic vegetable products across between actors. And as you can see, and there's a few points I want to draw your attention to, a lot of the organic vegetable products that are being marketed to consumers in Flanders actually come from abroad, and the organic vegetable products that are produced in Flanders, they reach the consumer mostly through the supermarket chains, rather than what is often taught direct selling and also specialty shops, and in that way, which is quite in line, although a bit different, with also conventional vegetables. And there's two main markets there. There's the fresh vegetables, and there is the industrial vegetable processes. So that's for deep freeze, particularly for frozen vegetables. But what we also see is that organic vegetable farmers also directly supply supermarkets or wholesale distribution companies, rather than working with the sale point cooperatives or the industrial processors. Of course, there's also hotel and restaurants and canteens in there. Another map I want to present to you is, which is a bit more complex, as you can see in the streams, is about the norms and knowledge about organic farming and so basically, where do farmers, conventional farmers, get their knowledge about organic farming, from whom, and also where do citizens and consumers get their knowledge about organic farming. And what we see is, like, what I want to highlight here is that on the one hand, in the center, you have conventional vegetable farmers obviously talking with each other, which is important. But they're also talking, of course, with organic farmers, even though there's quite few, they're a minority, which can be which can influence them. But they also get a lot of information from input suppliers, from farmer organizations, and so on, and from the government. Moreover, when it's about actual market opportunities, that's where they will get information from their current commercial partners, sale point cooperatives, industrial vegetable processors, and so on. Of course, farmers are also active on are reading the press and are also affected by all kind of public relations and social media, and also are contributing to that. And so all of that comes together, and out of which farmers can form an opinion about whether to convert or not, and whether that is something they would be interested in. Also for consumers, they get information from many places. And a few things I would point out here in terms of both of like how citizens and farmers are influenced is that there are also indirect relations there. So it's also about how NGOs and sector organizations interact with the government and so on in terms of messaging, in terms of the press and that and so forth. So those are things that are definitely worth considering when we're thinking about messaging and presenting information to farmers or consumers about organic farming. I've also created a value network map when it comes to policy influence and how different actor groups are represented. I think what's important here is to highlight is that Belgium is a federal country, so we have at a regional level Flemish Parliament, but also the Flemish government, but also the federal government with different policy domains that are relevant to the development of organic farming or vegetable farming. Also, of course, the EU plays an important role. You have the political parties presenting and being and selecting candidates both for the government and for the parliament. Of course, there is the elections, and of course, at EU level, you have different groups active on trying to influence and inform policy making. In Belgium, what is also very typical is that these different policy domains organize sessions with different sector representatives and NGOs in order to in order to shape new policy, including Bioforum, which represents the organic farming sector interests. Now, out of all of these interviews, I asked and a focus group. Basically, the question is, okay, what is holding the growth of organic vegetable farming back? And we've identified multiple barriers of different types across the value chain. Now, as you can see, this is over 100 barriers. So in order to advance talks with stakeholders, I've tried to condense them in 12 shorter statements that cover different dimensions of what is keeping the organic vegetable farming from growing. Here at the supply side, our first barrier is that the high land prices and the strong dependence on seasonal leases by conventional vegetable farmers, and also the lack of nearby organic land owned and operated by like organic livestock farmers, for example, to lease, hinder the conversion and expansion for organic vegetable production. So that's a big bottleneck. Then there's the high perceived switching costs and production risks that are an obstacle for many non-organic growers. It's no secret that trying to work organically certified is not something that you can learn from one day to the other. Moreover, so there are risks in terms of you can have crop failures. Also, when it comes to the transition period, this is a 2-year long period where you basically have to abide to the rules of organic farming, but without being able to market your product as organic certified, which can be quite a big hit for farmer income. Then many vegetable farmers, I talked about the aging population, are at the end of their career and therefore are not really interested to do such a switch. And moreover, if we're thinking about this generational change of new farmers or young farmers coming in, there are high entry costs and takeover costs that hinder them. And that's, of course, something that applies to conventional vegetable farming, but this is even more so the case than for organic farming. As a fourth barrier at the supply side, is that there is an insufficient and affordable quality seasonal or specialized wage labor and affordable mechanization options. And that forms a bottleneck for organic and conventional growers. And this is really, this is quite a technical, quite a technical problem, but does impose headaches, particularly on farmers that are already short on labor. Demand and the value chain. There's a couple of barriers there, and I must say that in the interviews, these were particularly highlighted as the most important bottlenecks. On the one hand, you have the high market risks for new organic growers due to a tight and intransparent and demanding market for small crops, and due to missing local processing channels for larger crops. So the intransparency results from the fact that organic vegetable farmers tend to have organized their commercial arrangements downstream individually, particularly in the fresh vegetable market, and therefore it's really difficult to kind of get into that market or like understand what is going on in that market. And more of this, particularly for the small crops in terms of surfaces. But if we're really talking about a big growth of the sector, we would also want to have there is insufficient volume to set up these bigger processing channels for these larger crops, which is a problem because you'd also want to have these larger crops also in the rotation. As a sixth barrier, there is little confidence and in the commitment from the local wholesale and retail sector, particularly because there is growing and cheaper, larger scale organic supply opportunities from abroad. So supply chain managers at the retail do feel as an incentive to and are also see the benefits of sourcing from elsewhere, but that of course creates major risks both for the processing companies and for the producers who want to convert. In terms of demand, so even though like not all of the local demand is filled in by local production, I would also say that the local market itself is quite constrained, and one of the reasons is that supermarkets tend to market organic as a luxury product, so to attract certain type of customers, but this does drive up retail costs and profits for those particular organic commodities, and that puts a brake on the volume sold. There's then a question of like, okay, would it be possible to market organic produce products more towards a mainstream customer? But there, what we see that it's difficult to meet the expectation of the average consumer in terms of cosmetic quality and price, low price, and also convenience. And this is particularly also in the case in short chain channels where there are also a lot of logistical challenges then to set up these kind of short chain channels in a convenient way. Lastly, I've identified some broader barriers. So it is felt that there is an inadequate investment, both from a public and a private side, into agroecological, technological innovation. And because of that, organic farmers more and more need to look to innovations that are developed also for conventional farmers, but by doing so, they also lose a bit. Organic loses its distinctive character and perhaps also its sustainability advantage. So the question there is, okay, can a different technological development trajectory be set up and supported? Right now, at least the commercial business model is lacking there. Furthermore, because like we have organic farmers also being forced into more conventional ways of quote unquote conventional ways of producing organic products through input substitution, but also by also increasing in scale and mechanization. There is a risk that certain consumers like that credibility of the organic label is undermined, both from the consumer perspective, but also conventional growers might think, well, okay, actually these organic vegetable farmers are doing practically the same as I. This is a perception, of course. Then lastly, the policy instruments used nowadays, so that are in place, appear to be too weak and restrictive to stimulate organic growth, particularly on the demand and the value chain side. So there is a question there is like, okay, can we develop better, more generous, more effective instruments on there? And on the other side, it is perceived that current policy does not sufficiently discourage the continuation of intensive agricultural models, which if it would change the calculus for farmers and processors and supermarkets, perhaps. Lastly, with the political climate as it is, there's the polarization around the environment, where agriculture and environment are kind of put as opposed to each other. It kind of creates it makes it more difficult to create support for organic farming as a reconciliation model amongst farmers, but also amongst certain segments of the population. So that's a barrier that, of course, relates to broader cultural phenomenon. Very tentatively, because first of all, the system analysis that I now presented is also still quite crude and needs to be validated further. In terms of opportunities, this is work that we will be looking into in the policy and business workshops as well. But a couple of things, a couple of points I would like to mention here. I think it is like a quite positive point, though, that most of the actors I interviewed are interested in the further growth of growing the local supply of organic vegetable farmers. And this is throughout the value chain and the government, although organic farmers might sometimes a bit worried that forced growth might cut into their incomes. So that's definitely something to look out for. In terms of a business opportunity, there's probably a need an opportunity to set up better cooperation to coordinate supply and bundle supply for wholesale and processing actors, so that we get a better, more transparent market, and perhaps also get some more negotiation room for organic farmers. As a policy option as well, there's an opportunity to increase the share of organic food in public canteens. This could be a lever. Also setting up, or at least attempting to setting up long-term partnerships with local retailers, so that producers, processors, and retailers are aligned to make that long-term shift. And also reconsidering the policy mix, which is definitely something that we're looking into for during the policy workshops that are still ongoing. So that's it from my side. Of course, if you're interested in particular aspects of this, feel free to contact me. Would be personally, I'll be happy to talk with you.
Thank you, Luis. And thank you to all the other presenters. We were a bit, let's say, longer than the planned time, but I hope it was an interesting presentation from all the case studies. As I said before, this webinar is recorded, and it will be available to everybody on the project social media, especially on YouTube, and you can also find it on the project website, which is emphasis.project.eu. Thank you again, everybody, for joining, and see you to the next Emphasis webinar. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.